Welcome to the Leadership Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Jono White. I'm the founder and principal consultant of Clarity. We are an Australian-based consultancy that works with leaders around the world, and our passion is to invest in people to become everything they're meant to be in order to fill the world with healthy organizations that people love to work for and customers line up to buy from. The goal of this podcast is to invest in you and your leadership. If you're just joining us for the first time, then feel free to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, the most popular being our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from around the world in all different sectors give their in-depth answers on leadership, what books they love, what they found most challenging, the most meaningful stories, how they structure their time through the day. That's free, so go and check it out. And we'd love to interview you about your leadership. I believe you have advice from your experience, your context, and your life so far that is important and can help other leaders. It's also a great way to give back. It's free to get involved, and you can do so by going to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or just Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form that pops up. We have a free resource for you on our website. It's called Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook. It has interviews with 10 world-class leaders, and you can go to consultclarity.org. It's right at the top, and get that today. We also have a daily email that we send out to over 15,000 leaders, and that email contains the highlights, our best content from our podcasts, our blog, my book, the books that we're loving that are out there about leadership. It's also the best way to get access to our masterclasses and workshops before anyone else. And there's also exclusive and limited special options just for subscribers. And you can subscribe by going to consultclarity.org/subscribe. Now, my gift to you is to work incredibly hard to provide the best leadership content I can to invest in you and your leadership. So if you're finding our content helpful, if you find this podcast helpful, then your gift to me could be this. If you do find it helpful, then write a review or rate our content and make sure you subscribe or follow. I can't emphasize enough how helpful that is. It really does help us to get the word out there so we can invest in more leaders to become everything they're meant to be. It also means a lot to me personally when people like you and people in our community share our content on social media. So if you do that, then please do look for me, Jono White, to tag me, and look to tag Clarity on whatever platform you're on. And our team, including me, I'm always looking to see when people have mentioned us so that I can engage with you. And also we look at sharing content. So if you write something about something we've done, there's also a good chance we'll share that with our followers. So if you could do that, that is a massive, massive help as we try to invest in as many leaders as we can around the world. Last of all, you can check out my book about how to deal with difficult people even if you hate conflict. It's called Step Up or Step Out. It's available on Amazon. You can just look up Step Up or Step Out Jono White, or you can go to store.consultclarity.org/book and check it out there. I have coached leader after leader after leader, and in more than 50% of the sessions, this topic comes up. How do I deal with this person? I'm finding it really difficult, and I just want to find a way that doesn't blow up, to just to have a difficult conversation, to lead them better. How do I do that? There's a 3-step process that I outline in this book that I believe can help you. Okay, let's get into today's episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Enjoy. Welcome to another episode of the Conversations podcast. Today's guest is Catherine Lawler, principal of Avonside Girls High School in New Zealand. Welcome to the podcast, Catherine.
Thank you, Jono.
First of all, I mentioned we have a lot of educators listening in, but from all different parts of the world. And one thing I'm always fascinated with, how different education, school systems looks in different parts of the world. Tell us a bit about about your role of principal and what you do in that role.
Yes, I know. Having been an educator in the UK and in Africa, it is, as you say, there are lots of differences across the sector and across countries. So my role, so my school is a unique school in New Zealand. It's a single-sex girls' school, but it's in Christchurch, which is where the earthquakes happened 11 years ago. And so the school is part of a rebuild in Christchurch, and we have a boys' school in the same building. So I want you to imagine that for a minute. So it's like a huge building, beautiful modern building with trickle shape, with a boys' school on one side and a girls' school on the other. And the idea is that we have the girls' school. I have a colleague who's principal of the boys' school. We have our own separate schools, but we share the theatres, the cafe, the library, gyms. So it's a sort of idea that you get the best of both worlds. It's a secondary school, year 9, year 13, which is about 13 years of age to 18. And I've got about 1150 girls in the school, or students, I should say. And so, yeah, and it has its separate board of trustees. And I started in that job as principal of January this, having moved down from somewhere else in New Zealand. I was really keen to be principal of the school situation. What's my job? My job is simply a duty of care for the school, the staff, the student body, and our community, which is a very sort of simple way of actually describing something incredibly busy. And my days can range from standing at netball to judging a house competition to dealing with quite a serious, a serious staff matter, leading a meeting, meeting with parents around student behaviour, reaching out to agencies, working with my senior leadership team, or wandering around the school talking to students and popping into classes. So the day is really varied.
Yeah, for anyone who hasn't really involved in education, I just can't explain how coming from. I haven't had involvement in education, but I work with a lot of educators, and I'm always surprised when I'm on the ground with a head of school about just the so many events. It's I always leave like shaking my head going. I was chuckling when you mentioned it's a simply. Well, it might be a simple description of the role, but boy, it's a fascinating role, and it is so interesting to see what comes up every day.
Yeah, and I think it's because it's such a dynamic place. In a school, you're dealing with all these different people. And people, as we know, are human beings, and they have lots of different emotions. You've got 1,100 teenagers, roaming the corridors. And you've also got staff, and you've got all that comes with that. And I think it's a sort of, I think Michael Fullan calls it, you stand back from the gallery and observe and do big strategic thinking. And the next minute you dive in and you're doing lots of the little things, and being very present in the moment for people. And then you back out again and do some more strategic thinking. So it's very multifaceted, and I do a lot of steps. I do a lot of steps, I think.
Yeah.
And have a lot of conversation. Yeah.
That's so good.
It's quite relational. You've got to know, but you've got to get very well.
100%. Yeah, I love that you said that. For me, is thinking the head of schools who'll be having a meeting with council about a building grant, development architect, millions of dollars, and then might be in a classroom because they like to just still be involved in a particular class and walk from one to the other. And it's like one group, you've got a bunch of teenagers literally in the room with chatting with versus talking about a multi-million-dollar building grant, project, and that's the life of a principal.
And I think from the outside, it could look really chaotic and quite reactive. but it isn't really. You've just got to be really deliberate and have your calendar organized and have time for the students and time for the other things. But from the
Yes.
outside, it could look like you never stop.
Well, it's so good. Thank you for unpacking that. I really love the way you are. Let's jump into your story. I'd love to start with
Yeah.
your childhood. So when you were little, I'd love to hear what were some of the moments of your life, Catherine, that really shaped you into the person and the leader you are.
Gosh, well, that's a long story, but we'll make it short. Yeah, I was thinking back to a funny story my mother told me. I'm the eldest of three girls. And my mother told me I used to, every time she tried to help me do anything, I would stamp my feet and say, I'll do it my own. I'll do it my own. So maybe maybe some of the desire for leadership was present even at 2 years old. I think the biggest thing for me was was my father. He was an incredible man, and he's not with us anymore. An incredible support, but also people drew to him, and he was always involved, either running his own business, but also leading sailing in where we lived in the UK, and everybody drew to him. And he used to say to me, "It's always about the people, the people, the people." Which now I've come to New Zealand. Is the people, the people, the people. So my, and he kept that sort of mantra and always made me try to reach for what I wanted to do. School, which is really good for me, but I still was living in a time in our society where were not something, even though Margaret Thatcher was in power at the time, women in leadership were not much of. And I went to a university, a top university in the UK, where only a third of men. And I had lots of experiences where not important. And I think that really shaped me. Hey, hang on a minute, we can do this too. And I got involved in quite a lot of leadership in my college, with things that were happening there, fundraising, things like that, because I remember struck by, it was the first time I'd come across it, this idea that maybe the world wasn't shaped for women. And I hadn't come across it before that, and certainly not, until I got to the university I went to. So that's always left its mark. And I do remember thinking at the time, no, you've got to, women, there needs to be diversity in leadership, and also, women have got things to offer and to say, and are important. In leading things in the future. And I remember going off I went to work in marketing, and I found that really dull, actually. And I went back to teaching, which I'd always wanted to do. And I was very lucky because I went to teach in a girls' school in London and got lots of opportunity to lead, and then went to schools in Africa, international schools, which I loved. And I had learnt Swahili, so I got the opportunity to lead aspects of curriculum development there, and work with the community. And I think from then on, I never looked back really. I always wanted aspects of leadership in my job, but many of them were around developing relationships with the community, with people, developing curriculum, things like that. And that's what I love most in Kenya and Tanzania, leading that kind of connection with the community. Really, it brought so much life to the school. It was really interesting. Yeah, and I mean, that's a very long story short, but I met teachers from New Zealand and moved to New Zealand with a very young family, and ended up at a big boys' school in Auckland, which I loved and was great. And I got lots of opportunities for leadership to a certain point. And again, I remember thinking, and somebody said, if you want to make a difference, to get into senior leadership, if you really want to take your ideas about education and make a difference. And so I remember being quite deliberate and intentional about moving to single-sex girls. And that was kind of a step, because I knew so get within boys education. Yeah, and then I ended up at another girls' school as a deputy principal in curriculum. I mean, this is a very long story short, and that was a school that was really broken, and so I had
Mm.
huge amount of growth, probably vertical style growth, into turning a school
Mm.
around, which was really, really interesting to do and taught me a lot about the importance of vision and moral purpose, the importance of planning, being really deliberate, communicating really clearly,
Mm.
and growing leaders. You can't do it all yourself. You've got to grow other leaders to and enable them
Yeah.
to do their job.
Well, like you said, long story short, there's so much in
Short.
there, and I have so many questions I could ask you. And I did mention before
Yeah.
the invitation's there to come back for a part two, because I honestly have 20 questions in my mind. I'm having to pick one because your story is
Yeah.
amazing. There's so much I could ask you about, but I want to ask you about your dad, and I'm sorry to hear
Yeah.
that he's no longer with us. What an amazing man! I can hear the impact he had on you. Um, of and I'm sort of putting you on the spot here, but any specific moments where you think of your dad and a story managed a particular crisis, or how you saw him lead in his business or with the sailing, or any moments that have really and of your dad as we have this conversation?
There's a number actually. Firstly, when I was young and I used to do stupid things like leave my handbag in the train and things like that. Dad would always come and support. And that was one thing that I learned from him. But I saw him leading and growing an aspect of sailing at the club we were at, and in the business they ran a restaurant. Success. Um, he was always calm in a crisis. He was always able to put people first. And in all the sort of way that he visioned things around growing the Mirror Club or the restaurant that they had, it was always about how could he create a where people wanted to be part of it, and they wanted to, what he was offering. And and nothing was ever too, if suddenly there was sort of 20 people descended or for him. And he worked incredibly hard, and I think that work ethic.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
love
there
that
was
you mentioned that the calm in the crisis is really something that I love that you said about it, because that I think is underrated. I think not only in leadership, but in if we can learn, and it is some people, it might be personality, definitely, or family of origin, but it's something all of us can learn and grow in, is to be calm in a crisis, or at least appear that way appropriately, and it can make such a big difference. I just think it's very rare in a stressful way in life.
I would definitely agree, and I think you can learn it, because I'm quite a passionate, emotional person, and I quite react. I think you can really learn and mature in yourself and how to remain and think slowly through how you're going to, even if you're thinking slowly, that's okay. How are we going to cope with it?
Absolutely.
I always use the illusion with staff who start panicking. We're not a hospital. No one's going to die. Let's think about how we're going to deal with this. But maybe that's something that comes.
That's good. Yes. Yeah, I think definitely experience helps as part of that learning and growing. But then you always meet or come across people who are much older who haven't learned that, and it's a reminder that it doesn't.
No,
let me ask you about.
Yeah, carry on.
I want to ask you about women in leadership, and
Yeah.
you mentioned your passion for as a woman in leadership you in the structures and maybe the culture. The first time you realized, okay,
Yeah.
what? So I guess what I'm interested to know is where do you see, from that point, where do you see things now? Um, and yeah, let me just ask you that first. How do you see things are
Mm.
going now as a woman in leadership, and generally around this idea of women in leadership across the
I
board
think it.
compared
I
to
mean,
where it
I
was?
think it's. Yeah. I look. I think it's moved on since I was, in my early 20s. Um, I had some kind of strange experiences at the marketing place I worked, where I was young and young graduate, and there was definitely a sense that the women were below the men, and that actually there was even that hint of to make it up. Even in a decent marketing house in London, there were things that you might have to do, and that's all changed. I mean, definitely that's all changed. But I do think that just like there is unconscious bias against race, there is still a lot of unconscious um, when you hit quite sort of patriarchal groups or the boys' club. And I don't think they consciously mean it, but you have to just work that little bit harder and prove a little bit more. Um, yeah, I do think that still exists. I don't think we should say, oh no, it's all fine, it's all equal, you know.
Mm,
And I do think there are still some stereotypes around women, such as those kind of words, emotional, that can
hmm.
exist. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's definitely better, perhaps in education, although not
Yeah.
all sectors. Um, yeah, I think we see that there still is some unconscious bias, and of course, for many women, they also have a break in their career, so often they come to leadership a little bit later, um,
Yes.
depending on you know which is really important and should be valued. Um, and it's really interesting because I see women not going for jobs until they're older and they feel I've done my time and I really should. Whereas I see younger men going for jobs after very little time. There's a confidence there
Yes.
that I could do this job. With women, they feel they need to do quite a bit of time to sort of earn the chance to have a go at that job.
Yeah, it's an interesting observation. I'd love to ask you what, you've worked in different locations,
Yeah.
the UK, in Africa, in New Zealand. Is there anything that comes to mind? What have you seen that has worked in helping to shift things forward? To mind that you've seen fail abysmally for all of us who are listening, men and women who want to be part of moving this forward. Anything you've
Yeah.
seen that's worked well, and anything that you've seen where you've gone, that does not work.
That does not work. I'll start with the positive one first. One of the things that I think is really incredible about New Zealand and New Zealand education is that we have incredible leadership development in our universities, in courses that aspiring principals can do, that deputy principals, head of department. And there's a real focus on leadership development, which you can do, as I say, either as a full year course or you can do it as PLD, PD training while you're working. Because I think New Zealand's education system really recognises the need for leadership rather than management. So that has been really, really good, and I think really effective in developing a leadership structures and ways that really robust ways that people are coming into leadership with more thought about who would be right around the table. There's a lot of talk in New Zealand about diversity and the importance of diversity around the leadership table.
Mm,
Um, and I think that has been really, really important in recognizing the need for diverse voices around a table and what diverse people bring to a leadership team.
yeah.
And that's been a real focus of work in New Zealand. So that's good. Um, and perhaps takes it away from of, the boys club, or you got the job because of who you know, or so finding more avenues and opportunities for people to work in that leadership sphere and then go they would like to do the leadership work they'd like to do.
Yeah. So what about
you see a lot more women as DPs now in boys' schools?
Yes,
because of the recognition of diversity, the need for diverse voices.
No, that's a good example, and I really love that you articulated that. So, what have you seen that hasn't worked?
And in this for women or generally?
Yeah, I think sometimes people are well-meaning, but they either have a it might be something where you go, I've seen this and it's a blind spot and people don't realize. Or so not necessarily something where they've tried to make it better, but I'm asking what can we avoid doing, or maybe even are there any big blind spots that you've seen in different locations that you think that might be something
one of the
for
things,
listeners to be aware
one
of?
of the things I have to be aware of as leaders, and I think it happens often, it probably happens in lots of sectors, but I see it in education, is that we can hesitate to look outside our organization. And I think that is quite a blind spot. So if you are looking for a new senior leader or a new head of department or a new principal even, it's really, really important, I think, that any institution thinks about the right fit for that team and for that position, and is open, doesn't make assumptions about who might come from within inside the organization, and sort of have it already sewn up in their head. I think it's really, really important to put a leadership position out and see what you get and look at that with a really open mind. So I think sometimes in education we can think, and we get better the devil you know than the devil you don't. But often somebody who, if you go with an open mind and you interview and you look for what you need for the team, sometimes you can find that freshness of someone coming in brings innovation and dynamism into a team. So I think that's a real blind spot. That can be a real blind spot.
Yeah, that's a great
I have
point.
seen that go very wrong. Yeah,
I think people can miss. I'm a really big believer in one of the things I love to when I'm working with an organization around values and vision and hiring and trying to like great people and take it up a real notch. And I think of the filter of if you, for most particularly for schools, let's talk about schools in education, if you of what you're doing and the values of your school, then the right team member I always think they may be willing to move across the country like you did, or even to move interstate in in different parts of the world, or even move internationally. And I think that's a great lens to think, okay, let's go to the other extreme rather than assuming we'll just promote someone internally, which I understand why people will for a number of reasons, but it's great to have in mind and to try to create something that whole and looks beyond going not just people here, but actually looking be so envisioned by what we're doing that they'd want to move their whole life over to us. And I just think that's a great lens to think like that.
I think you can get it badly wrong otherwise, and teams can become quite static or lack that kind of innovation around the vision. And I would say that has been, and I have seen it go badly wrong. Because of course in education it's very hard. It's very hard to
sorry,
go. Sorry, I know I'm interrupting you.
There's a bit of a delay.
That's okay. That's okay. Carry on.
um, let me jump to the next question. You're very gracious.
Yeah,
Thanks,
go for
Catherine.
it.
Sorry, we keep interrupting each other. Okay, I want to ask you about aha moments you've had in your career so far. Can you think of any big aha moments where the penny really dropped and you realized, that I made a mistake there, or you had a piece of advice from someone that's always stuck with you, or you just learnt a lesson from, you just remember standing in a particular spot and thinking, you had a revelation of something. Any aha moments in your leadership journey that pop into your mind?
Oh, quite a few. Yes. I mean, I think if you stop having those, then, you've got to ask yourself, are you still leading with that kind of energy? Because they happen on a regular basis, I think, especially around people. And I think that's why you've always got to seek to understand, because then you understand why someone's behaving a particular way and how you might work with them to grow them rather than just assuming things. But aha moments I've had. One moment I had is definitely working with a group of leaders who had sort of a hierarchical power structure and were quite, were quite tricky. And I went to see a communication consultant, and she said to me, it's really simple. You just need to change the space that you're in and change the dynamics, and that will change the space that you're in, and that will change where people sit, and then that changes the dynamics of the meeting. And something else she said stuck with me too, which was, I know it was really simple and it was really true. It really did change
I
all
love
of the
it.
power structure in the room. Where she said, you've got to remember that you're leading different groups of people. And so when you have something you want to communicate, you need to remember that you've got your butterflies who are really excited and want to have, this is cool. Where are we going? What are we doing? Let's go. And the planners who need to know that you've really planned it and that you know what's happening and where it's going. And then you've got your black hats who want to ask all the difficult questions. And you need to be able to give all of those people.
Yeah,
So
that's
that
that's
was
such good
really
advice.
important. That was a real aha moment. And gosh, so many actually. Yeah, I remember, another aha moment was working with older staff members around, becoming more innovative in their classroom or leading or changing how they're doing things, and just stopping and asking them about their values and why they came into the profession, and really kind of having that aha moment of understanding why it was so difficult for them to retire or so difficult for them to leave. It's a lot about actually listening to people so that you understand where they're coming
Yeah,
from. And that really helps
yeah,
you to have aha moments to get it right with the relationship. But,
yeah. It's funny you
there's
mentioned that.
heaps. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, carry on.
The listening comes up so often, more than almost anything
Mhm.
else on the podcast. What have you learned? Because this is something school leaders really have to be good at. You're listening to multiple stakeholders. You have to be very intentional with creating spaces. It's not just your
Yeah.
workforce who turn up every day. You have parents who are living busy lives,
Yes.
so invested in kids. What advice
Yeah.
would you give, and what have you learned about how to listen to the different, versus the planners versus the black hats, and also different stakeholders? What have you learned about how to listen well?
Yeah. There's a couple of things that I think are really important. The one thing I've learned is you must be really present. So, absolutely must not screen open. It's really tempting, but you need to be really listening. And the only way you're really listening is if you are looking them in the eyes and you are listening to them. As soon as you start making notes and doing other things or have a computer screen, it distracts from that sense that you are present in the room with them. Um, I think it's really important that you start to show you're listening. You start with an empathy comment. Um, and what they're thinking or where they're coming from. You understand and you acknowledge how they're feeling. And I think that those two are two really, really key things. I think educate, by the nature of who we are, we like to rush in and fix things and rush and come up with a solution, because that's kind of what we do when we're teaching with students and each other. And I think, that we've got to remember, and actually you should be doing the least amount of talking. 70-30, isn't it? The other person should be doing the most amount of talking. So those are the things I've learned to really do. And that's difficult because you want to make notes, but actually you need to listen and empathize with them, particularly a parent.
That's so good. And it's amazing how much you can, school leaders, parents are one of the most challenging stakeholders, because they can be at times, quite irrational, and yet very, very, like, it's the thing in the world they're most passionate about is their child. And so you have this combination of passion and sometimes not being rational. That means it often takes a lot of listening to help. And as soon as they feel heard, someone may then start moving away from being irrational and actually start being able to hear you. And it's until they feel heard, they may not be able to hear anything.
That's right.
I love
that's absolutely right.
The advice of the 10-second pause. And I love that you mentioned not even taking notes. And it's a great exercise for anyone out there who wants to learn to listen better. Conversations, and you can do this with family, you can do it with friends, in work, team, with your boss, depending on what role you're in, is when you're in a conversation, just mentally count to 10 when they pause. It's a great little exercise that we realize how often the person has been pausing, a bit like with our lag in this conversation, which I feel critical about. But it forces you to pause and realize, I was about to jump in because I had something to say, but actually when they kept going on a thought, and I would 80% of the time, instead of us jumping in with what we think, and by the time we get anywhere near 10, they jumped in again and kept going. It sounds ridiculously simple. But it's such an effective way.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think don't be scared of. I agree with you about that. Don't be scared of it being silent for a short time, because that gives you some thinking time, and that often that people will start talking again. You're absolutely right.
Well, as we start, I have a few Leadership Express questions for you. The first one is, what is so I'm interested in a book that you have gifted to a lot of people, or it might be recommend a lot to people.
Okay, I've got two actually. A book I often give to people is Legacy, which is All Blacks. Everyone knows the All Blacks, top rugby team in the world. So there's a brilliant book called Legacy, and it takes the metaphor of the All Blacks shirt and the way that the All Blacks became so successful, because basically they developed a model when every new young rugby player coming onto the scene was shirt and then given a book, and the black book was for him to record his experiences in, but the shirt was given to him as a legacy that he would hand on. So how would he leave that shirt, when he left rugby? And it's all about how those kind of elements of leadership that brought the All Blacks to that place where they won 2 World Cups and did what they did. Easy to read, and it's small chunks but really interesting for leaders to read. And the other book is Belonging by Owen Marshall. Not Owen Marshall, you'd have to look it up. It's called Belonging. It's a New Zealand Ngāi gentleman who lives in the UK, who works with sports teams like the Proteas and some of the English football teams, about how you create a culture of belonging, and that has to happen if you want to be the best. And that's a fabulous book to read.
Wonderful.
And I have just recently read Sir Alex Ferguson's book, Leading too. So you can tell I've been looking at the sport analogies.
Yes.
That's very good.
I'm a Manchester United.
There you go.
Yeah, I love Sir Alex Ferguson, and that book is great. That I particularly love the stories in that book about
me too.
Things like one of the ones that stands out to me that I remember is when he realized he needed to get off the field. He was on the field in training with the team, and he realized, actually, if I'm going to see things clearly, I need to get my other coaches to run what happened so I can be step back and see from a higher level everyone's doing and see the strengths and weaknesses of players that I might miss if I'm on the field. There's little things where you go, oh man, that is so profound, and yet he just little things like that, but there's so many of them in that book.
Yeah, talking about, that's right, that's where it comes from. You have to listen to it because that's beautiful. I learned more about football. I'm hesitating. Football, soccer.
Yeah. Oh,
I love the thing about being yourself, actually.
Being yourself, that stayed with me, and a number of advice as well.
Be yourself.
So good. Yeah, great recommendation. I love that you.
Yeah, so any of those three.
Okay, let me jump to the next question. What is what's a great piece of advice you've received at some point in your life, in leadership? Someone gave you some advice and you just think, wow, that was a really great piece of me.
I think there's a couple of bits, really. I think the be yourself is really important. It's really hard to lead an organization if your values don't fit with their values. You can't pretend. You have to be yourself, because that's who people will then follow or look up to or be inspired by, hopefully. I think you must always seek to understand. It's very easy, particularly in the leadership world of education, which is really busy, as we talked about at the beginning of this podcast, and really chaotic. It's really easy to make decisions too quickly and not seek to understand. And it's easy to make assumptions, but actually it's really important to seek to understand first before you, and to therefore to slow think things, which is another good piece of advice that somebody gave me. So that's not one, but three, but they connect.
They do. They're great pieces of advice. What is, do you have any favorite quotes? Are there any quotes that you love? You know, they've just been really profound for you, or you always have them up around somewhere. Favorite quotes?
Oh, no, I really love the Desmond Tutu one, and I have to find it. I didn't have a think about that. There's a wonderful Desmond Tutu quote, which I'll see if I can find quickly, which I just love. And that's about, you know, if there are things to do and you want to make a difference, you need to get on and do it. Don't wait for other people. Don't wait for the system or the society. Get on and do it yourself. I'm trying to see if I can find it. Oh, I know. Yes, if you are neutral, that's right. And if you are neutral in the situation of injustice, you've taken the side of the oppressor, which I think it's really, really important. And a person is a person through other persons. You can't be human in isolation. You're human only in relationships.
Yeah. They're wonderful.
To me, that's
wonderful.
They're wonderful. Yeah. So I think about the first one a lot around being an upstander, not a bystander. And like any country, we're dealing with unconscious bias around race. I think, you know, actively doing something about that as a leader, and you're not standing up to it when you hear it in your organization, then effectively you're on the other side, you know. And the other one I love, relationships. I don't need any organization without relationships with people. It's not something you do on your own.
I agree.
So there you go.
Wonderful quotes from Desmond Tutu. Thank you so much for sharing those. Questions. This one, you can pick something lighthearted or something serious. Any movies that are your favorites or have really influenced you or had an impact on you?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I'm trying to think of. Oh, those are the sort of questions that you can't think of an answer in the moment. I love I tell you. Okay, I've got a serious one that I love, which is a movie, and I can't remember the name of it now, about a dilemma. Eye in the Sky. Now that's a movie that had left me thinking for days and days and days. And Eye in the Sky is a movie that's shot in real time. So over the 2 hours of watching the movie is the 2 hours. Have you seen it, where the Americans and British make a decision about whether to bomb? Yeah. And I think that stayed with me for a long time, because it's the idea of dilemmas and making decisions. And that a dilemma is a dilemma because there isn't to work out fine. You can't do nothing, and whichever side you do, you're going to do something a bit righter than the other side or not. And that stuck with me for a long time. It's a kind of serious thing, I suppose, rather than funny, but it stuck with me for a long time. About actually, you have to embrace that is sometimes the case. And you make the best decision you can, but no decision is not a good one.
Yeah, it's come up
making no decision
on the podcast that and any decision is better than no decision. Decision, and this idea, and that movie certainly articulates that in heavy. That's one of my favorite movies from recent years. Actually, I so appreciated, like you said. I'm always looking for a movie that stays with you, that finishes, and the next day you're still going, oh wow, I'm still trying to come to grips with that. The best stories too, I think, and that was definitely one that I didn't realize. I sort of turned it on as interesting, and like you said, was really challenging for a while afterwards.
Absolutely. Stays with me, and I mean, it's a great one for students too, because it gets them really thinking.
Absolutely. Okay, last question. Only give one piece of leadership advice to a young leader, what would you say?
I think one piece of advice would be what we talked about earlier, to listen. And I mean, to listen to everybody. So to seek out experts to support you and listen to them, to listen to yourself and to what is right, and to listen to the people that you lead. And you must do what is right. Yeah.
It's, I mean, that's the advice that's come up most often, and I love that, because I think it's true. Someone who's been leading for quite a long time in different contexts, like you have, Catherine, it's good for me and for everyone else listening to stop and realize you could say anything there, and it is significant that you come back to listen. Of leaders do. And so thank you for sharing that. It's wonderful advice, and a big challenge to all of us listening, who are listening now, to focus on listening to others and not being so fast to speak and try to jump in and fix things. Sit across whoever it is, like you said, and to truly listen. And then I love what you said earlier about that empathy statement, actually making sure that we communicate back to them what we're hearing, and make sure they understand that we understand, because that's when that really goes to another level, and that can also diffuse a lot of really tricky things, just the simple art of listening. So wonderful advice. For those who've really loved hearing your story and are really interested also in what you're doing at Avonside in Christchurch, where can people connect with you online? So find the school.
Yeah, so through LinkedIn, obviously, and then also through the school website, through my email address, which is just claw, which is quite funny, at avonside.school.nz.
Yeah, that is funny.
I know, the claw. I knew it when I got there. The claw is coming.
The claw. Yeah, the claw is coming.
Yeah. Just reminds you of that movie, hey? The claw,
The claw.
But
Yeah,
anyway.
that. Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah.
Well, for tuning in. What a fun episode! So good to chat with Catherine about so many different topics. I want to encourage our listeners to also check out the John O. White Leadership Podcast and the Leadership Question of the Day podcast. They're two other podcasts I do that could be content for you as a leader to grow in your leadership. But I want to finish today by saying a massive thank you to you, Catherine, for being so generous with your time, for sharing wonderful about your dad and his wonderful, the way he modeled great leadership for you. America and women in leadership. It's been more than anything, it's just been a joy to spend time. So much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Johnny. Oh, it's been great. Thank you very much. It's always good to reflect back and think about everything. So thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast as much as I did. If you're joining us for the first time, don't forget to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, including our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from all over the world in all different roles, in different industries, answer these 7 questions on leadership, and leaders give these in-depth answers around how they spend their time, a book that's been significant for them. It's just a gold mine. It's completely free to access, so go to consultclarity.org and look for that. We'd also love to interview you about your leadership. I believe your experience, your life, your context means that you have advice on leadership that other leaders can learn from. Yes, you, if you're going, not me, well, no, I really believe you would have something to add. So if you're looking for a way to give back, it's completely free to get involved. And we would love to interview you through the 7 Questions on Leadership. You just go to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form and get involved. We have a free resource on our website called the Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook, 10 world-class leaders giving their thoughts on leadership, and that's completely free. It's available on our homepage, consultclarity.org, right at the top, so make sure you go and get that and download it today. And we have a free daily email that you can subscribe to. We send this out to over 15,000 leaders from around the world. And it contains the highlights of content from our podcasts, our blogs, our books we're reading. It's got the best content, and it gives you exclusive, limited, early access to our masterclasses, workshops, new products, special offers. It's all for our subscribers. You can go to consultclarity.org/subscribe and join 15,000 other leaders. And you know, my gift to you is to work really hard, particularly through the Leadership Conversations podcast. I have been blown away by the quality of the leaders, and I'm learning as much as anyone in doing these interviews. So I'm having a great time. And my gift to you is to keep lining up the best leaders I can to invest in your leadership. Your gift to me, if you're finding this helpful, there is something that you could do that would help us out massively. And that is to write a review and to leave a rating for our podcast or wherever you're watching or listening to this. I can't tell you how much that helps us out. Also, subscribe or follow. It really does make a difference in helping us to help more leaders become everything they're meant to be. Another thing that means a lot to me personally is when I see our community share our content. So if you do share this or any other piece of content on social media, then thank you, and please do that. And look for me, John O. White, or Clarity, and tag us in your post. Our team is always looking for posts to engage with from our community, and there's also a chance that we'll share your content to go beyond and share it with our followers. Last of all, you can check out my book. It's called Step Up or Step Out: How to Deal with Difficult People Even If You Hate Conflict. I wrote this book because 50% of the coaching sessions I have with leaders, this topic comes up again and again and again. And it's this idea of, how do I have this difficult conversation? How do I lead this person better when I'm finding them difficult? Or in some cases, you look and you say, I think I might be leading a difficult person. They're just quite difficult to lead, or I'm finding them quite difficult to lead. So there's a 3-step process that I unpack in Step Up or Step Out. And the amazing thing, and I've literally done this myself, and I've heard it anecdotally from other leaders as I've coached them, is that if you follow this process, you will see that person step up and change their behavior or make a decision, which is to step out some of the time. 95% of the time, people will step up or step out in just 4 weeks. And I stand by that. It's you have to read the book to understand, but I really do believe in it, and I've experienced it firsthand. It works. So you can go to Amazon, look up Step Up or Step Out John O. White, or store.consultclarity.org/book. Well, thank you so much for listening. We're going to be back with a new episode next time of the Leadership Conversations podcast. And I hope today has helped you to take another step towards becoming the leader you're meant to be. See you next time.